Welcome to Discovering the Northwoods. On today's episode, Jim Bogern wrote an introduction to the journals of A. Bede Gray. Here is that introduction. Geologist A. B. Gray traveled from Lake Superior into what will become Manitowish Waters in 1846. His map and journal chronicled Chief White Thunder and Cross Lake, which is likely Rest Lake. His trip moves from LaPointe over to Flambeau Trail to the Turtle Portage in Mercer, Wisconsin. Cross Lake, Trout Lake, White Deer Lake, today White Birch Lake, Lac Vieux Desert, and Lake Superior are remarkably documented with his map and journal. We choose to include this portion of Gray's journal to give early context and insight into what becomes Wisconsin's Northwoods. We begin with A.B. Gray traveling to LaPointe to organize an expedition into the lake, streams, and forests south of Lake Superior. As with many historical works from this era, there are phrases, terms, and descriptions that are inappropriate to our modern sensibilities. The Manitowish Waters Historical Society in no way condones these offensive remarks or passages, but chooses to read this publication in its entirety for educational purposes and accurate historic context. For this episode, due to Gray's initial lack of familiarity with the Northwoods through his multiple misspellings of significant places, we have corrected to the modern-day pronunciations. However, on our transcript, you can find both spelling versions. Report taken from Journals of A. B. Gray, 1846. 29th Congress, document number 211, House of Representatives. First Session, War Department. Mineral lands on Lake Superior. Mr. Schlater to continue the surveys, and upon finishing all that was requisite, to join me at the Montreal River. I sailed for LaPointe, which place we reached in the middle of the night after a run of 6 hours, and where I procured such further supplies as were deemed sufficient to carry the parties through with their work and back to the agency. Mr. Eliasson was directed to run out the lines upon Black River and to connect with those upon Presque Isle. Mr. Schlater to commence on the Montreal, another point of beginning, from which a large number of square miles had been located. On my arrival at LaPointe, I found, as in the summer before, that the numerous bands of Chippewas residing in the region ceded to the United States by the Treaty of 1842 had assembled to receive their annuity in goods and money from the government. The enterprising and talented superintendent of Indian affairs for this district, Mr. Richmond, had already been upon the ground, and but a few days elapsed before the whole body of Indians, several thousand in numbers, and had received each of their portions, and were cheerfully leaving for their winter quarters in the interior. Major Campbell was also here, this island being within the boundary of his portion of your district, having left for the Ontonagon but a few days before our boat reached that river on our way up. We had frequent talks with the chiefs, and I recognized several of them who I had seen the year before. Much that was interesting and important was gleaned from these Indians, and in our consultation with them, Mr. George Johnston was of great service to us. This well-educated and intelligent half-breed is recognized as the head chief of the Chippewas and possesses much influence with them. Together with an extensive knowledge of their various habits and customs, partly through his advice and our desire to obtain all the information possible of this district of country, it was decided upon by Major Campbell and myself to return to Copper Harbor by an inland route. and to avail ourselves of the opportunity offered by the Lac to Flambeau and Trout Lake bands going to their homes by way of the Montreal River. It was so arranged that we should join them when we reached the mouth of this river, and proceed from thence with them. Thus, we would be enabled to obtain a sketch of topographical features, together with an idea of the mineral character of that portion of the interior and south of the district under your superintendency, and which had never yet been explored. By the time of their arrival, the surveys had progressed as far as was practicable and necessary, and the parties were directed within a few days to complete the lines they were running, and to proceed to the agency at Copper Harbor with the boats and men, where I expected to join them about the time of their arrival. On the afternoon of the 29th, the canoes have in sight, and by sunset a large number of the Indians had encamped on the right bank of the river below us. By 8 o'clock next morning, we were all in the march, Major Campbell and myself being provided each 2 able and trusty voyagers who had been accustomed to pack and travel through the woods. We were 3 days and a half making the portage, estimated at about 35 miles by the old Indian trail from the mouth of the Montreal to Portage Lake, which latter is the head of the succession of small lakes extending for 10 miles, and which are the headwaters of some of the tributaries to the Chippewa River. About 2 miles along our route from Lake Superior, we crossed a high range of trap rock, bearing northeasterly and southwesterly. Descending rapidly half a mile further, we forded a main stream and continued on an old trail to the southward, leaving the river to the east of us. Some 10 miles further on, after rising from flat and swampy grounds, we came to another range of trap, less distinct and regular than the first, although showing itself bare upon the surface in many places. Again, in about 8 miles, immediately after crossing a small stream running to the east, and which we supposed to be a branch of the Montreal, we ascended a high and elevated dike of trap rock, perfectly bare, with numerous veins of quartz passing through it, some of them from 2 to 3 feet in width. The trail passes directly over this range, and from our cursory examination, we judged it well worthy the explorer's attention, and have no doubt from the surface indications noticed by us will prove to contain veins of metalliferous nature similar to those upon Keweenaw Point. During our travel between the 2 last ranges, we observed scattered about large and isolated boulders of trap, and of the old red sandstone formation, at some time or another detached from the regular dikes, which appeared to be nearly parallel with each other, and ranging in a north 20 degrees east and a south 20 degrees west direction. Having suddenly descended from this last dike, we came to a low ground covered in a sort of prairie grass, with occasional groups of tamarack and spruce. A mile or 2 further, we crossed a deep running stream, flowing easterly, 20 feet wide and slightly colored red, though perfectly clear. Here we found one of the bands of Indians out, and having already caught a number of fine fish. This stream we took to be one of the main branches of the Montreal, and was represented as heading in several small lakes about 10 miles to the southwest. Pursuing our journey, we rose gradually upon a high granitic range of hills, the rock showing itself in many places, and continuing in the southeasterly course, we came to another bold and rapid stream, 20 feet wide, flowing to the east, with a bed composed of heavy masses of trap and granite. Encamped immediately on the south bank, the ground flat and moist. The next morning, about a mile and a half to the south, crossed the head stream of the Montreal. Of about the same width, but sluggish, having alder branches and fine grass meadow on either side for 600 feet. 4 miles more, over slight elevation and occasional swamps, brought us to the Portage Lake of the Mississippi waters. The country bordering this portage path, aside from the mineral characters, has but little to recommend it. Little indeed in agricultural view, the descent towards Lake Superior from the main dividing ridge being sudden and broken of numerous cedar and tamarack trees. Occasionally, good timberland is met with, and spots that may admit cultivation. Maple, hemlock, birch, and pine, growing to a large size, are here and there met with upon the high grounds, and cedar of uncommon growth occurs along the swamps. The heavy rain that had fallen recently, before and during one or two of the days of our march, might have swollen the streams and caused the trail to disappear in its worst state. But in our judgment, it would be difficult to make even a passable road for horses or mules, unless by the outlay of a large appropriation of money. Should it be found practicable, however, to use such at this point, fine meadow grass may be had in abundance, and I no doubt will be found profitable. For the mode adopted at present of packing in the interior is a slow and expensive operation. This is the route taken by Indians and traders going from LaPointe to Lac de Flambeau, Trout Lake, and usually Lac Vieux Desert. Although the chief of the latter lake and his band went this season with their canoes to Anse, Keweenaw Bay, and from thence by a portage of 50 miles to their home at the Old Gardens. Their packs usually are very heavy, from 100 to 150 pounds in weight, and they are obliged to take advantage of as much water travel as possible. The system of packing, too, is not confined to men alone, but their women pack equally as much, and their children down to 4 years of age in proportion. Upon our expedition, I saw an old squaw over 70 years of age with a pack weighing from 80 to 100 pounds, which she carried over the whole portage. From this portage lake, we took the birch canoes and our little fleet winding for 10 or 12 miles through narrow passes and small lakes of half a mile in width, landed on the east side of Turtle Lake, where it was necessary to make a short portage over half or 3/4 of a mile overland to another lake. Whilst the canoes were being carried across, our camp pitched for the night. Major Campbell and myself started out with an Indian guide to examine the country around. Our course was southwesterly, and after walking 10 or 12 miles, returned about sunset. We passed through some beautiful valleys and over gently undulating ridges, with heavy growths of maple, birch, hemlock, and pine, the soil for culture equaling any to be found on the shores of Lake Superior. Crossing over a heavy dike of trap, we noticed large boulders of quartz, one mass of a dull, milky hue, measuring 8 feet in diameter, and in the trap rock was observed several narrow veins of iron pyrites. Upon returning, our guide took us by an old wigwam and showed us a beautiful specimen of the micaceous specular iron, weighing over 100 pounds, which he said came from the neighborhood of the trap range that we had crossed. They permitted us to break off some pieces, which were brought to the harbor by us. The next day, we continued on our course to the eastward. After a short distance by water, made another portage of 2 miles with canoes, part of it through deep tamarack swamp, and launched them into the main branch of the Chippewa River. This stream appeared to be about 30 feet wide where we struck it, rapid and quite deep, and I understand can be descended from Trout Lake in canoes the whole way to the Mississippi, with but a few portages around falls or rapids. In the evening, we entered Cross Lake from the river, so called by the Indians for it resembling a cross in shape. We encamped upon the high point of the land jutting out and forming one of the arms of the cross. Upon this point are two large wigwams and several acres of ground cleared and cultivated, being summer residence of White Thunder, a tall and athletic-looking Indian. He had reached home the day before from the payment of LaPointe, and he received us in a very friendly manner. Here he lives with his brother in the possession of all around him. No one seeks to molest or disturb him. Unlike civilized man in this respect, the Indians fear not his neighbor. He leaves his wigwam unprotected, his canoe, his net, or trap without guard, conscious that no brother of the tribe will disturb his property. It is a singular fact that one Indian will not steal or plunder from another of the same band, although they all agree in taking what they can from the white man or stranger, and whenever the opportunity offers. Our course up the river for about 10 or 15 miles to this lake was easterly, although the stream curved around in every direction, occasionally opening into small and picturesque lakes, surrounded by high land with excellent pineries, and narrowing again with the width barely sufficient for the passage of a canoe. After a detention of a day and a half at this encampment, our guide stopping with the other Indians to join in a medicine dance for the cure of a sick papoose, we continued to ascend the Chippewa, and in the afternoon at 5 o'clock came to Trout Lake, where our tents were pitched upon the bank in a beautiful pine grove, a short distance above the Canistino's Lodge, near the outlet of the lake. Fine fish with delightful water is found here, and the small patch of ground, which was but rudely cultivated, had produced excellent vegetables. Several families reside upon its borders, and Canistino, the chief of the band, has his hunting grounds in this district. Trout Lake is from 2.5 to 3 miles in length, containing numerous small islands, and may be called the head of the canoe navigation of the Chippewa River. The river today, in some places, was quite shallow and rapid, with occasional rafts of driftwood, which, obscuring our passage, caused us to lighten the canoe and lift them over. In the bed of the river near the shoals, we saw quantities of freshwater clam, some of them upon the inside of the shell displaying beautiful colors of pearly luster. Heavy growths of wild rice were passed through in the swamps bordering the river. The gathering of this rice in the autumn is usually performed by the squaws in canoes, and is an article of food much prized by the Indians. Observing a kind of bird rising in large numbers, one was shot, and I noticed it to be identical to the sora found in certain seasons in Virginia. The next evening, we reached White Deer Lake with our canoes, after making several portages and passing up a small and crooked branch with difficult swamps, through which we pushed ourselves. This small sheet of water, so called according to tradition, from the circumstance of white deer having been seen upon its bank, was supposed by us to empty into a branch of the Wisconsin River. Antoine, our guide thus far, has his winter quarters upon the borders of this little lake, and he and his squaw and several children are all that live in the neighborhood. Catching fish is sustenance, and hunting for furs during the winter, which latter he'd take into the settlements and trade off for provisions, appear to be his only occupation. He had a small clearing with a comfortable wigwam, but, like most of these Indians, is very poor and depends almost entirely upon his gun and his net for subsistence. Here Antoine, finding himself at home, thought it more pleasant than traveling through the thickets and swamps, and becoming a little fractious, declined going any further with us. He, however, decided to guide us some 10 miles more. A part of it by water, which he had not done so, would have been a serious matter to us in the loss of time, the want of canoes, etc. The second day after reaching White Deer Lake, we bivouacked upon a high range of hills near a small running branch, which the Indian told us emptied into the Wisconsin River. Our guide, Antoine, had now returned to his wigwam, leaving us to pursue our journey through the portion of the country known only to the wildest Indians. In the night, I got some good observations for latitude with a small sextant and the artificial horizon, which, together with a small pocket chronometer that I had taken along, gave us our position very nearly. Knowing also the position of Lac Vieux Desert, from the observation of Captain Cram, which I had taken the precaution to procure, I immediately got a course, and early the next morning we were on our way homeward. We had now, as was supposed, got about halfway on the route through to the Anse settlement. During the day, we forded several streams running to the south, one or two of them quite large, 60 feet wide. Tamarack swamps from half to 2 miles in width were waded through, and in the evening, about sunset, he struck Lac Vieux Desert, although the lower end of the lake. Half a mile further, after crossing the deepest running stream, which we took to be Wisconsin River, some 5 miles before striking the lake, we fell upon an old trail, which was followed, it seeming to run the right direction, and which brought us out. One of the men started a fire, and soon the smoke, curling above the trees, attracted the attention of an Indian who had gone over to one of the islands from the mainland opposite. His canoe was shortly seen winding its way towards our camp in the dusk of the evening, and in half an hour he was with us, when we agreed with him to take us across to the head of the lake. The next morning, we crossed the lake in 3 birch canoes, our party consisting of Major Campbell, Mr. James Paul, who had accompanied us on our route, myself, and 4 men. Near the upper end of Lac Vieux Desert, our canoes landed upon an island, where several of the acres of ground are cultivated by Indians. This is what gives to the lake the name of the Old Gardens, or Old Planting Grounds, and some very fine potatoes are raised upon the islands. We found only 2 wigwams of Indians at this point, the main part of the band not having reached home from the payment. The land in the vicinity of this beautiful body of water is of very good quality, resembling the regions of Anse and Great Island. Heavy growth of the white and yellow pine are seen upon the borders of the lake, and ridges slightly elevated of maple, birch, hemlock, and poplar were noticed in a short distance back. Sugar bushes, spots where sugar is made from the sap of maple, appears numerous. The water is limpid and pure, and the climate salubrious. One of the Indians gave us some specimens of iron pyrites, and he told us that he could, in 2 days' march, take us to a fine vein of copper. On the morning of the 12th of September, we left the waters of Wisconsin and commenced the descent to Lake Superior. From where our canoes landed at the heads of the lake, we struck upon an old Indian trail, and following it through swamps and ravines, over hills and high granite ranges, and we reached the aunt's settlement on the fourth day. The trail was a very rough one, and if it had not been for the quick eye of our Indian voyagers, we should have found it extremely difficult to make our way through. At the aunt's, Major Campbell and myself secured each a good canoe, and dividing our party, set out for Copper Harbor, he by way of the south coast of Keweenaw Point, and I taking Portage Lake route. The second night I reached the harbor, having been driven by a violent gale for 4 hours, and through tremendous seas and breakers, which no open boat other than a strong birch canoe could have weathered. I was perfectly satisfied with these bark canoes, when managed by skillful voyagers, are the best boats used on the lake, and indeed, as proof of it, the well-known able voyager Toussaint Piquet, whom I had taken up with me in the early part of the season, and who guided me through all my voyages and explorations, particularly upon this night, during the perilous moments of the equinoctial agile, was finally lost on the 13th October, passing by the same coast and through the same seas and breakers in the yawl boat, with the universally laminated Dr. Houghton. Our trip through LaPointe, although accomplished under many adverse circumstances, has enabled us to become acquainted with the interior of the district under our superintendency, and by which also we gained much information to use to the explorers and settlers, as well as to the government. Much of this extensive region, which has heretofore been supposed to be barren and worthless, now presents itself a country of vast importance, with resources for producing great wealth and offering facilities of which but few districts can boast. This geographical position of the lake, its mineral ranges and fine natural harbors, pure and healthy atmosphere, beautiful and picturesque scenery, with its fish and waters unsurpassed in variety and excellence, all render it peculiarly attractive, not only to the settler for the purpose of agriculture, but to the explorer and adventurer in search of riches embosomed within rocks, the invalid, the traveler who is desirous of acquiring scientific knowledge, and the admirer of the natural beauties and wonders of American scenery. Thank you for listening to this episode of Discovering the Northwoods by the Manitowish Waters Historical Society. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube and on our website, mwhistory.org.